Hi, I'm Mariam Lam. I'm an associate professor at UC Riverside. I'm a member of the UCHRI Advisory Committee.
I'm Jan Goggans. I am also an associate professor of English at UC Merced. I'm also on the advisory committee of UCHRI and have been with Mariam for a long time looking at the California Studies Consortium, like since it was only an idea.
Yeah, been through a lot of proposals together. So I guess today we're having this Google Hangout to help prospective applicants or proposal submitters sort of get a better sense of what we're looking for in terms of public humanities grants, and then maybe talking a bit about some of the ones we have funded in the past so folks can get a better sense of what the parameters are, what a good proposal looks like. So Jan, maybe you could start us off talking about your vision, say, of the public humanities?
Yeah, I actually think that one of the challenges of this proposal is not so much, figuring out how to articulate the proposal, knowing how we read them, but understanding what public humanities is. I think this is actually a very new concept for people who work in the academic humanities, because we're so attuned to research, and many of us don't really want to leave the academy. It's a safe place to be. It provides us with merit and promotion, and it allows us to work alone. So I think public humanities is asking us to do something pretty radical. And for me, the key to public humanities is that it be a project that is really founded, premised, committed to public engagement. So there has to be some level of working with the public, not being Clifford Geertz and studying them and taking notes on them, not seeing the public as a laboratory, but really working with the public. I have some great examples from UC Merced. Mariam, do you have any from Riverside?
No, you go ahead. Tell us the Merced examples.
Well, we had two projects come out of UC Merced in the last couple of years. We have one literature faculty member who has written a children's opera, and so she stages that opera and takes it into elementary schools. So I think she's published something on the UCHRI website at one point in time. It's a very back and forth, because of course the kids and their response are very much involved in this opera. We also had a professor who worked with his classroom to redo the Mark Twain exhibit up at Angels Camp. So this struck me as a very good example, because of course they were bringing, what I guess we could call state-of-the-art intelligence into this very, very small town exhibit. More importantly, I think, the students were learning from their point of view. They were learning all about how to actually work with people, not just how to curate an exhibit, but how to work with people. And of course, the community itself benefited. Their exhibit improved, their tourism improved, their economy improved. So I think both of those examples I like very much, because they show a win-win situation. Right. When you're engaged with the public, both sides improve.
Yeah, what I like about both your examples is if one looks at the call for the Public Humanities California Studies grant, it's very specific about having a kind of public engagement, and there's a notion of public translation that should be one of the components. And often people think of engagement as just sort of academics going out and talking to the community or the public, and that's just sort of another audience for to absorb sort of academic speak. And so our notion of engagement and translation is one that is very interactive, that actually incorporates the community, different CBOs or community-based organizations, NGOs, museums, other kinds of organizations and participants that then work with the academics or scholars, so that it isn't just one that's about dissemination from the academy to the public, but one that moves beyond the academy altogether, so that when we're talking about public intellectual discourse, we don't just mean intellectuals talking to the public, right? We mean more journalistic writing, more accessible activities, engagements, that kind of public intellectualism. And I think the only other things I would add are that often we get proposals that forget the humanities side of the public humanities, and so let's say they're already working on some great sort of sociological projects or political scientific projects, or really disciplinary specific projects like architectural or something. And we need them to actually really engage with the humanities as well, right? The UCHRI is one of the few centers that still fund the humanities in the UC system, and so we take that as a serious charge, that these projects can definitely be about material culture, social sciences and such, but they need to really engage with the humanities in a genuine kind of conscientious way. And then I suppose my last suggestion would be about the budget writing. I think we look at the budget very seriously, and I have a habit of doing this myself. My dean made fun of me because in a grant proposal I wrote something like, and a big chunk of money would go towards this. Right, big chunk of money.
Gazillions of dollars.
Right, but the website where the call is listed at the UCHRI is very specific about things that we can fund and things that we can't fund. And so if people just actually took the time to read that and stuck by it, they would get their full funding proposed, as opposed to us only being able to give them a portion of it because we can't fund certain things they ask for, or just for proposers to be very realistic about costs of participants, right? How many international participants can you fund versus domestic? How many state-based versus national participants? And to just really be a bit vigilant about the budget.
I was looking at some of what we funded, and I was, even though there are three very, very different proposals, I was able to come up with three things that they kind of all share. So one of the things I noticed is that it all had a very, very specific topic that had its relevance made clear. So, for example, the one we funded is called Empire Logistics, a conceptual basis for understanding the impact of the logistics industry on inland Southern California. Long title, sorry. But clearly, I mean, even in the title itself, it's, you know, understanding the impact. So it's very, very clear why this is relevant. It becomes clear how the humanities factors in as you read through the proposal. I noticed they all were very, very clear about place. So we funded one in the Inland Empire, we funded one in the LA River, and we funded one in public venues that hold New Deal art. So again, very, very clear sense of place. There is also a very, very clear approach. In the Inland Empire, you have interdisciplinary community-based research, a digital platform. I think in the LA River one, you had approaches that look at an interactive booklet, web companion. So being really clear about how you plan to affect, make real the goal that you set out, and of course having a goal. I mean, all three of these proposals have a very, very clear goal. And I think those are super important for us as the people who are reading the proposals. We need to know that those things are happening. I think it's also important, every once in a while we'll get a proposal and people will say they're going to do something. And it's really clear, I'm thinking specifically of oral history. It's really clear they don't know how to do oral history. You know, that they've just thrown it in because that seems public. So I think really, I mean, that's why I wanted us to start by talking about public humanities. You really need to know what public humanities is. And I think Mariam's point about humanities is really important. It's a humanities project. It's not simply media. You know, it's not just a digital platform. Those things might all factor in and be very, very important. But that's not, I mean, it's in the humanities. And the way that, you know, working with the public, I loved one of the proposals that we funded used the term citizen researcher. And while that sounds like something from, you know, a Gary Cooper movie, I think that's really important, you know, that we acknowledge and valorize the kinds of research that the citizen does, not just the academy research. I really loved that idea.
Yeah, just building off of what you're saying, Jan, what I really liked about the Empire Logistics Group, even though I think internally we kept calling it the Containers Project,
because that's what they do.
Actually really know about the history of the logistics industry. And so what I found really helpful about that proposal was that it gave this historical overview of the logistics industry, right, which does seem like very material culture, kind of cultural industry that stemmed out of World War II and throughout the Vietnam War and such, and has now become sort of a sign of environmental degradation and such, right? And so not only are we just talking about sort of interactive arts exhibitions and personal narratives of participant observation and ethnography, and then incorporating artists' photos and films and such, but we're also looking at the actual raw material of these freight containers, right, that then move from the Long Beach Port of LA, you know, from globally, right, all over the world, and then through Southern California into the Inland Empire and then to the rest of the nation. So not only do we have California as the site of global and historical processes, but we also have them using the object of the container freight to then reconceptualize it into a kind of base action where they're turning it into a kind of conceptual project. So rethinking about containment itself and containers as a kind of metaphor for larger sort of socio-political and philosophical, theoretical, humanistic issues. And so I thought what they were doing with it was nice in the sense that it was very interdisciplinarily kind of materialist as well as very kind of conceptual.
I liked that one because it was so new. The other two proposals that we funded really based, they had more of an historical base. So one on the LA River. I mean, how long have problems with the LA River been going on? How long have we been trying to revitalize it? But this was a really new look at that, and I think that can be very, very helpful. So the, what's it called? Let's see, Project 51, Eat, Play, Dance at the LA River. And, you know, again, you have relevance, you have specific place, and you have very specific goals to help people to reintroduce Los Angeles communities to the river and to build public support so that you have ongoing revitalization efforts. The proposal acknowledges that those have been to some degree successful, but that they need to be even more contemporary. So I like the way that took this kind of new community-based understanding of how people can work together, and, you know, saying our approach is going to be to actually bring people to the Los Angeles River. And I thought that was nicely done. I think we were all pretty excited about that proposal when we read it. It seemed to take an old project and see it through very, very new eyes. And that is the same approach that fascinated me about the New Deal project. I think the other thing that's nice about the New Deal project and the LA River project is that they're working with entities that are already established, and that worked. Miriam, I cut you off. I'm sorry, you were going to say
Oh
something.
no, I was just gonna say, I suppose for those who are thinking of proposing things, sometimes the advisory committee does really like a project, but would make suggestions, right? And so I think the LA River project is a good example of that, because the UCHRI Advisory Committee also has directions that it would like to, say, provoke in many of the proposals, right, that we think can draw out sort of more exciting nuances of their already excellently written project. And so for the LA Rivers project, I remember the committee saying something like, oh, maybe they could rethink their title, because Eat, Play, Dance is sort of reminiscent of sort of these, you know, the Julia Roberts film and the book, and a little too celebratory of these notions of, I think they use the term a sense of play around the LA River, right, in the way revitalization can happen. And that's exciting, because it is different from the kind of depressive history of the LA River and all the connotations of environmental waste and such. But at the same time, we don't want a project around California to be sort of too celebratory, right? That we're not about promoting California poppies and the bear, right? That we're sort of thinking about California critically, and how there are these beautiful aspects of California that are laced with these very dense histories, right? And that we can sort of work on them together. So what I really liked about that project is these moments where they were talking about the interactive booklet and web companion and event series, but then also sort of how multi-ethnic and socio-economically diverse the areas around the LA River would be. And so what does play mean in that sense? If we're not going to talk about the LA River and sort of north East LA as a space of gentrification and hipsterization, where they're getting rid of all the Hispanic restaurants and putting in arts sort of pop-ups and such. So what would play and revitalization around the LA River Basin that took into account these depressing, darker histories do to the project, right? So.
Yeah, and we even wrote back to them and said, you know, look, you're missing something a little important here. And so one of the things that we do when we read proposals is actually talk about them and think about how we might make them even better. So we do send them back asking for revisions that take certain things into account. We did that with the Living New Deal project. And that project I thought was really interesting, because it kind of intervened with a larger project that's national and said, okay, there's this big project, the Living New Deal, it collects photographs and things like that. We're going to do a California New Deal. And the idea in that was to go into historical museums and try and collect all of this photography, all of this information, and actually, you know, make a site of California New Deal, and to approach that through something that the project was calling a salon. And as we were, you know, evaluating this, I don't think any of us had a very clear idea, and the proposal itself didn't really articulate. And certainly salon has a lot of connotations. So that was something we had to write back to them and say, this part needs to be defined. And it ended up being one of the most exciting things about that proposal, as a matter of fact. So I think that, you know, being open as proposers to how the committee itself might be able to work with you and improve your proposal is really the best approach.
Yeah, I would also add that often a lot of these groups have already thought about the suggestions we make to them, but they just didn't articulate it clearly enough in the proposals. And so by us asking them to add a little more language or something, that is a step that we actually wish would have taken place earlier, right, prior to us getting the formal applications. So, for example, we're all listed on the UCHRI website, so proposers or people considering proposing something should actually contact their local campus representatives, or they could contact the UCHRI, Kelly and Sudine, directly. And so we can actually help them flag what they should add more to and such before it ever comes in, and then they would save the step of having to do any potential revision later. And it's just so nice, sitting around with the committee to get these strong proposals, and it makes for better conversations amongst us too, for them to already have it really nicely polished when it comes in. And I know the other advisory committee members hate when they get an inquiry like the night before the deadline. So if
that's a little bit like the student who emails and says, "Can you help me with my essay that's due tomorrow?" It's not simply that we don't have enough time if somebody contacts us that late. It's that we want people to be really thinking these through. That's super important, and I think Miriam's phrase, critical California studies, is very important. We do see this as, an intervention into a very old school California exceptionalism. We don't believe that anymore, and the proposals should reflect that. It's a diverse state. It's not a gold rush.
Thank you both so much for this. This is very informative, and it's wonderful hearing you talk a little bit about the projects that you funded last year too, and hearing your reflections on it.